I only stopped by to say hello to my son, but my daughter-in-law looked me up and down and said, "What is this old woman doing here?" She shut the door in my face. And Victor said nothing. I once sold my laundromat to pour every penny into his company, and now I am treated like a stranger. That night, I opened an old steel case in my hotel room, and the next morning, they called me 47 times. But something had already shifted. I flew in from Kansas on a quiet Wednesday morning. The clouds were low and grey over Austin, but I didn't mind. I had no plans to stay long, just a quick hello. Maybe hand Victor a card I had written the night before, and a small tin of oatmeal cookies I baked the way he liked them when he was 8. No calls, no texts. I just wanted to see my son's face. The gate code hadn't changed. I walked up the stone path, careful not to trip over the edge of the fountain they'd added. The house looked bigger than I remembered. Too big for 2 people. I rang the doorbell once and waited. It was Stephanie who opened the door. Hair blown out, workout clothes pressed, phone in one hand, iced coffee in the other. She blinked at me like I had walked in off the street with a clipboard. Then she tilted her head and said, flat as a cutting board, "You showed up. What is this old woman doing here?" She didn't even open the door fully. Behind her, I could see Victor down the hall. He wasn't on the phone. He wasn't busy. He was just standing there, hands in his pockets, like he wasn't sure if he should walk closer. I said softly, "I was just in town. Thought I'd say hi." No one responded. Stephanie stayed where she was. She didn't smile, didn't step aside. The air felt thin. So I held out the tin of cookies and the envelope. She looked at them like I was handing her a used tissue. There was this pause. Maybe 12 seconds. Not long, but when you're standing on someone's doorstep and they're making you feel like trash, it stretches. Victor finally walked forward, slow and stiff, like someone told him to go be polite. He took the envelope, not the cookies. Said thanks, then backed away. No hug, no eye contact, not even a glance that said he was glad to see me. Stephanie pulled the door halfway shut again. I turned before it fully closed. Didn't say another word. I heard her mutter something just before the door latched, but I didn't catch it. I walked back down the path alone. In the Uber, I sat in silence. No music. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry yet. Just something deep in my chest, like a door had quietly closed behind me, and I didn't realize I'd been on the outside all along. And I kept thinking, was this really it? Had I really become that woman, the one who gave everything, and now barely gets a nod at the door? Have you ever stood there, in front of people you love, and felt like you'd just interrupted a party you were never meant to be invited to? That's how it started. Not with a fight, not with a goodbye, just with a closed door, and a silence that said more than anyone in that house ever did. I checked into the Hampton Inn just off I-35. Nothing fancy. Clean sheets, working heater, a vending machine that still took dollar bills. I didn't unpack much, just set my bag down, pulled out my toothbrush and the notebook I always carried. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the tin of cookies still in my purse. Not one had been touched. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. Not my sister in Missouri, not my neighbor back home who usually watered my porch plants. I just wanted to see my son. I wasn't expecting balloons or dinner reservations, just warmth. A porch sit, 5 honest minutes. But the way Stephanie stood in that doorway, with her hand still holding the iced coffee, like I was something sticky she stepped in, that image stayed with me. I could still feel the coolness of the tin in my hand, the way Victor wouldn't meet my eyes. I turned on the television just to have sound. A commercial about luxury cruises was playing. people in white linen dancing under lanterns. I muted it. Instead, I pulled the envelope from my coat pocket, the one Victor had taken from me without even looking inside. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a card, one of those Hallmark ones with a watercolor of a sunflower on the front. Inside, I had written 3 lines in my handwriting that was getting more crooked by the year. Just wanted to see your face. Proud of you. I love you. That was all. No check, no lecture, no guilt. I set the card on the nightstand. I wasn't hungry, but I walked to the gas station nearby and bought a small cup of instant soup. Back in the room, I let it go cold on the windowsill. The next morning, I woke up at 6 without an alarm. Years of habit. I sat up, pulled on a sweater, and stood by the window looking at the parking lot. And that's when it really settled in. Victor hadn't texted. No missed call. No message from Stephanie. No follow-up of any kind. Not even a thanks for stopping by. I started to feel a kind of quiet clarity in my chest. Like something that had been clouded for a long time had just shifted into focus. I opened the drawer beside the bed and pulled out the manila folder I always travelled with. The one with all the documents. The old deed. The statement from the sale of my shop. The shares I still held in the company Victor co-founded 12 years ago. They never asked how I got in on the ground floor. But I did. When Victor and his partner started the business, they were short 80,000. I sold my shop, the one I built from nothing, and wired him the money. He never put me on payroll. I never asked. But I held on to that 5%, quietly. Now, sitting in that hotel room, I started flipping through the folder, line by line. Victor thought I was just the old woman who dropped off cookies, but I still had my name on something they never paid attention to. And something about that morning light, the silence from his house, the hollow in my chest where warmth should have been. It all came together. I wasn't going to call him. I wasn't going to explain anything. But I was going to act. And this time, they would notice. I left the hotel just after 7. The streets were still quiet, only the early risers on their way to work or walking dogs with steaming coffee cups in hand. I walked 3 blocks and took a seat on a bench near the university district. There was a bookstore across the street I used to visit when Victor was in college, back when he still called me once a week just to tell me how he was doing. I sat there for a while, long enough for the morning to stretch and the clouds to move. And when I stood up, I wasn't just deciding to go back to Kansas. I was deciding to close a chapter. On my way back to the hotel, I passed a florist. I went inside and bought a single yellow rose. Not for anyone else. Just to put in the room. Something simple and alive. By the time I returned, my phone had 2 missed calls, both from a number I didn't recognize. No messages, I didn't call back. Instead, I laid the rose on the desk and took out the folder again. This time, I didn't just read. I started sorting. There was a letter from the original investment agreement Victor had signed. Back then, they needed fast cash to meet a vendor deadline. I wired him the money in 48 hours. No questions. I was his mother. That was enough. But now, 12 years later, that same 5% had grown, not just in value, in influence. I had voting rights, silent partner on paper. Victor never talked about it, never once brought it up in front of Stephanie. She probably thought I had baked my way into their lives. But I had signed contracts. I had a lawyer once before he retired. I still had the email threads. And I had one more thing. A sealed envelope from 8 years ago. I had written it the day I made the investment permanent. Back then, I didn't want to meddle. But I had a feeling. A mother's instinct. so I wrote him a letter in case the day ever came when he forgot who helped him start it all. I never mailed it. Now, I opened it. The words surprised me. They were strong, clear. You may outgrow my house. You may no longer need my voice. But if you forget my name, if you forget what came before you had everything, I will remind you. I folded the paper slowly, placed it on the bed. Then I picked up my phone. Not to call him, but to call someone else. Her name was Petra. She used to work as my bookkeeper back when I had the shop. Smart girl, quiet. I had helped her finish community college back then. She worked for a small financial firm now. She answered on the second ring. I told her I might need someone to look over some papers, just to make sure I understood what power I really had. She said yes before I even explained. That night, I ate dinner at a small diner near the highway, the kind with plastic menus and cracked leather booths. I sat by the window and watched people come and go. No one knew me there. No one gave me odd looks or asked why I was alone. I didn't feel sad. I felt calm. And for the first time in a long while, I realized something. Being needed and being respected were not the same. And maybe, just maybe, I still had more to teach them than they ever thought I could. I spent the next morning organizing everything I had. Petra told me to scan and email the paperwork. I borrowed the printer at the hotel's business center. It smelled faintly of toner and stale coffee, but it got the job done. I stood there, feeding each page in, slow and steady. Investment agreements, signed contracts, bank transfers. Things I had stored for years, never thinking I'd actually need them again. Petra called me back by noon. Her voice had changed. She sounded alert, focused. She said what I had was more than enough. Not just evidence of ownership, but proof that I had been a founding investor. A silent one, yes, but a legal one. My 5% wasn't a footnote. It gave me leverage. If the company were ever sold or merged, I had rights. I could block decisions. I could ask for audits. I could call for votes. Victor had built a beautiful house, married into a pristine image, but underneath that, it had been me who gave him the first push. And I had never once reminded him of it. Not once. I thanked Petra and closed my laptop slowly. I sat there a while, just breathing. Then I called a taxi and headed back toward Victor's neighborhood. I didn't plan to knock. I only wanted to see the street again, to stand outside and remember. To be honest, I didn't know what I was searching for. Maybe closure. Maybe proof to myself that I wasn't overreacting. But when I reached the end of the cul-de-sac, I saw something unexpected. Victor's car was gone, but Stephanie's was still in the driveway. The front door was wide open, and boxes lined the porch. I stayed across the street, hidden behind the trunk of a tree. I watched as Stephanie walked in and out, carrying folded towels, half-filled garbage bags, even a potted plant. She looked agitated. Her phone was pressed to her ear the entire time. She paced, kicked one of the boxes, and slammed the door behind her. Something had shifted. I didn't know how or why, but I knew the energy. It was the beginning of panic. I turned away and walked back toward the main road. That night, I checked into a different hotel. Something felt different now. I didn't want to be near their world. I needed space. The following day, Petra emailed me a summary of options. It was simple. I could send a formal notice to the board of directors, asserting my voting rights. I could request a valuation and an internal audit. I could request a meeting, or I could do nothing. Let them stew. But then I saw the final paragraph. Petra had pulled recent filings. There had been a quiet discussion inside the company about a buyout, a major one, and if it went through, I was entitled to a direct payout, a substantial one. but only if I was still legally listed, if no one had tampered. I scrolled down. Petra had already flagged a concern. An unsigned amendment filed a year ago. It attempted to change shareholder designations. It wasn't finalized. But someone had tried. I leaned back in the hotel chair. My hands didn't tremble, but something colder moved through me. Someone had tried to erase me, not just from the front porch, but from the books. And I had shown up just in time. I didn't feel angry, not yet. What I felt was closer to something sharp, like a wire tightening inside my chest. Not rage, but readiness. I called Petra again. I told her to move forward, not with a confrontation, not yet, just with the notice. Something official, something quiet, but impossible to ignore. She said she'd send the draft by the morning. I slept well that night, not out of peace, but because for the first time in years, I wasn't unsure of where I stood. I was done asking for space in their lives. Now I was taking back my name. I woke up early the next morning. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that sinks into your skin. I sat at the small table by the window and watched the sun slide across the parking lot. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't mind. Petra had said she'd send the draft that morning, and I wanted to be ready. When her email arrived, I opened it slowly. The notice was short, precise, not dramatic. It asserted my voting rights, acknowledged my stake, and confirmed I was aware of recent activity surrounding the potential buyout. She had already filed a copy with the board. She said I only needed to sign and return it. I printed it out, signed my name in ink, and sent it back. The moment felt oddly anticlimactic, quiet. But I suppose not every turning point comes with a bang. Some arrive on paper, in perfect grammar, with dates and reference numbers. I sat back. For a long time, I didn't move. It was strange how still the world could feel after something irreversible. By afternoon, Petra called again. She sounded calm, but there was a hum of something underneath. She said a notice like that didn't go unnoticed, especially not by the firm managing the corporate records. She had already received a response. Not from Victor, from a man named Mallory, head of legal compliance. Mallory had asked for a call. He wanted to clarify my involvement, which, in legal language, meant they were nervous. I agreed to speak, but through Petra only. I didn't want to fumble through legalese. I wanted things clear, controlled, distant. Petra said she'd handle it. I turned off my phone after that. I went for a walk near the pier. The wind was salty, the gulls loud and ridiculous. I let my feet carry me past the fish market and toward the benches facing the sea. I sat for almost an hour, just breathing in the air. When I got back to the hotel, I had 3 missed calls. None from Victor, all from Stephanie. I didn't return them. That evening, Petra forwarded me a transcript of her conversation with Mallory. It was illuminating. Mallory hadn't denied anything. In fact, he seemed more curious than defensive. He acknowledged my name on the original articles of formation. He confirmed the 5% was never bought out, never transferred, never nullified. He hinted that someone had submitted a revision, but didn't follow through with full authorization. He asked Petra if I intended to assert control. She told him no, not yet. That I only wished to be informed, respected, and properly acknowledged. That was when Mallory hesitated and said the following. He had been asked, informally, to suppress my records from the shareholder system. He hadn't done it, but he had been asked, over a year ago. Petra didn't need to say the name. We both knew who it had been. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because something inside me had finally cracked open. It wasn't just that I had been left out of a dinner. It wasn't even that I had been insulted on a doorstep. Someone had actively tried to erase me from the company, from the books, from their future, and I had let them get so far before I ever blinked. That realization didn't bring rage. It brought a kind of sorrow I hadn't felt since Victor was a boy. When he once said, at 15, that he didn't want anyone to know he had been raised above a laundromat, that boy had never really disappeared. He had just put on nicer clothes. I turned off the lights, sat in bed in the dark, and I promised myself, quietly, that I would not be invisible again. No more being the quiet mother in the background. No more sitting on folding chairs in the corner while others clink glasses and say nothing. It was time to step forward, without noise, but with weight. The next morning, the sun felt louder than usual, harsh and too bright. I stayed in bed longer than I meant to, eyes open, not quite ready to move. By noon, I packed my suitcase. It didn't take long. I never really unpacked. I called a car to the airport, not to fly, but to rent a sedan. Something quiet, nothing flashy, the kind you drive when you don't want to be noticed. I didn't tell Petra. Not yet. Victor's office was in a tall, square building off the highway. Modern glass, too much chrome, the kind of place that doesn't age well. I didn't park. I just sat in the car across the street and watched. Around 4, I saw him come out. Alone. No coat, no briefcase. Just his phone in his hand, his thumb moving fast. He didn't look up. I drove off before he saw me. That night, I checked into a different hotel. A modest one. Older carpets, dim lamps. But it reminded me of places I used to stay in when Victor was a child, and we travelled to small tournaments or science fairs, back when he used to talk to me in the car. I took out the folder Petra had prepared, and then I took out the second folder, the one I had kept hidden from even her. Inside were receipts, names, a single letter from an old tax consultant, long retired. He had flagged an odd expense years ago, an internal fund listed as dormant but never fully closed, a placeholder account with my name attached, but never accessed. I never thought much of it back then, but now I began to. The next morning, I went to the county clerk's office. Small, beige walls, buzzing lights. I asked for public records tied to my maiden name. The woman behind the glass looked confused, but she printed what I asked for. There it was, a holding entity, formed 17 years ago, no activity in a decade, still listed as active, and the address. It wasn't Victor's company. It was Stephanie's old firm, before she married him. I folded the papers slowly and placed them back in my bag. I didn't go back to the hotel. I drove straight to Petra's office, walked in without calling. She looked surprised, but she stood. I handed her the folder without saying anything. She read through it quietly, page after page. Her face didn't change, but her fingers started tapping the edge of her desk. Then she looked at me. She asked if I wanted to open an investigation. I said no, not yet. I wanted to wait. I wanted to give them time. Just a few more days, to hang themselves. Petra nodded. She said one thing. Sometimes, silence is the loudest warning. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from worry, but because I was remembering something Victor had said to me when he was 12, upset over losing a school election. He had cried into his pillow, saying people didn't see the work he put in. And I had said to him, someday they will. Funny how that promise had circled back. But this time, it wasn't about him anymore. This time, it was about me. 2 mornings later, the phone in my hotel room rang before 8. I didn't answer. I already knew who it would be. A minute later, the front desk called. There were visitors asking to see me. A man and a woman. Said they were family. I asked the receptionist to tell them I wasn't available. I didn't have to ask who it was. Victor and Stephanie never did anything quietly, and never separately. I stayed by the window, curtain just slightly pulled back, and watched the silver SUV idle in the roundabout for almost 15 minutes. Then it pulled away. I sat back down and picked up my tea. Petra had warned me. Once people like that feel something slipping through their fingers, they come running with fake concern. They ask questions with rehearsed sadness and wear confusion like a mask. But I wasn't interested in theatre. Later that afternoon, Petra called. She had been contacted by Mallory again. He mentioned a sudden flurry of internal movement. Victor's name came up on flagged documents tied to old accounting structures. Stephanie had made an inquiry about access to historical holdings, the kind of language used when someone realizes a vault might have been cracked. Petra said quietly that the walls were beginning to creak. That evening, I drove to the coast again. A different spot this time, a quieter beach just north of the marina. I brought a blanket, a small flask, and a photograph of Victor when he was 10. In the photo, he was holding a kite he had built from scratch. He had been so proud of it. We had spent the whole afternoon chasing that red kite along the sand. It kept crashing. But he never got angry. He just laughed, ran again, laughed again. That boy had been mine, entirely. I wondered what piece of him had broken, or hardened, or gotten lost. The next morning, they came again. This time, I met them in the hotel lobby. Stephanie wore a blazer too tight for the hour and sunglasses indoors. Victor looked like he hadn't slept. His voice cracked when he said hello. They asked if we could talk somewhere private. I shook my head. Victor glanced at the lobby clerk, then leaned in. He said he was sorry if there had been a misunderstanding. He said they missed me, that the kids had been asking about me, that it wasn't fair for old things to come between us. I let him speak. When he paused, I looked straight at Stephanie. She didn't say anything. Her jaw was clenched. I asked if they remembered the conversation at the door that morning, when she looked me in the eye and said I was just passing through. Stephanie didn't respond. I said, "I'm still passing through, just not the way you think." Victor asked if we could have dinner, just the three of us, talk everything through. I paused, then said, "Not tonight," and walked away. Back in my room, I sat on the bed with my hands in my lap. I didn't cry. There was no joy in seeing them scramble, no thrill in their panic, just a deep, quiet sadness. Because it had come to this. Because the boy with the red kite had become the man who erased names on paper. And because I was the one who let it happen for so long. I placed the photograph back in my bag. And that night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. I spent the next day in the quiet corner of a small library 2 blocks from the hotel. It smelled like old wood and paperbacks long forgotten. I liked that. It reminded me of when things were simple, before the money, before the layers of polish over every word my son said. Petra had emailed me final drafts of the document, a quiet transfer of voting rights, a temporary freeze on disbursements tied to my signature, legal language that made my role louder without saying a single word, the kind of move that didn't scream, but echoed, slowly, into every meeting they thought I wouldn't be part of. I printed it out, folded it carefully, tucked it into the notebook I always carried. Back at the hotel, my phone buzzed. Victor again. No message. Then Stephanie, followed by their lawyer, whose number I hadn't seen since the original contract was drafted over a decade ago. I didn't return the calls. That evening, the hotel concierge knocked. There was a delivery for me. A gift box, deep green, with gold ribbon. Inside, a bottle of wine, a card, and 2 tickets to a dinner cruise along the bay. The card said, "Let's start over. Just us, please." It was signed with both their names. I looked at the tickets: prime seats, top deck, Saturday evening. I placed them face down on the nightstand. The next morning, I booked a small table at a diner across town, one with formica tables and the kind of coffee that comes in heavy mugs and never runs out. I asked for the booth by the window and brought only my notebook and a pen. I made a list. On the left side, all the moments I let them treat me like an afterthought. Holidays skipped, calls unanswered, visits cut short. Little thing they said that chipped away at something they never thought I would miss until it was gone. On the right, the names of 3 small foundations I had quietly supported over the years. A local girls' education nonprofit, a program for first-generation college students, a literacy centre that helped older women finish their GEDs. Then I drew a line across the middle and wrote one word: enough. I took out the document Petra sent, signed it, and emailed her a scan. When I returned to the hotel that evening, the phone rang again. I didn't pick up. At 7:15, I walked down to the harbour just to see. The dinner cruise was boarding. Couples dressed in cocktail attire lined up along the ramp, some laughing, others posing for pictures. I stayed back in the shadows, watching from a distance. At 7:34, I saw them. Victor in a blue suit, Stephanie beside him, looking around nervously. They held the extra ticket like a question that would never be answered. They boarded without me. I stood still for a long time after the boat pulled away. The water reflected the lights like a quiet goodbye. And I knew then. I didn't need an apology. I didn't want revenge. What I needed was clarity. And for the first time in years, I had it. I turned around and walked back toward the city, toward the life I was finally choosing for myself. One without performance, one with truth, no matter how quiet it sounded. 3 days later, a black car pulled into the hotel's driveway. I had been expecting it. The driver stepped out, checked his watch, and politely asked if I was ready to go. I nodded. No questions, no small talk. The drive wasn't long, 15, maybe 20 minutes. Past the trimmed hedges of houses that had names instead of numbers, through streets where everything looked manicured and muted, until we reached the private gates of the country club. It was a place I used to visit often, back when my name still appeared on guest lists without second glances, back when Victor would call ahead and make sure the staff knew to bring the breadbasket warm. That had stopped years ago. But now, here I was again. The maitre d' led me to a private dining room, not the usual large one for galas and anniversaries. This was more discreet. High ceilings, heavy curtains, a long wooden table set for 6. Victor stood when I entered. Stephanie followed a beat later. Her eyes looked sharp, drawn at the edges. She forced a smile. There were 2 other people I didn't know. One was clearly legal. The other, perhaps financial. They nodded at me, unsure whether to treat me like a matriarch or a landmine. I didn't sit down. Instead, I placed the envelope on the table. Inside was a single-page statement from Petra. Not a threat, not even a notice, just a confirmation. The foundation I had once placed under Victor's oversight had officially transitioned. New governance, new transparency measures, new bylaws, all compliant, all sealed. I didn't speak for a while. I watched their faces. The flickers of understanding were slow to arrive, like waves hesitating before they crash. Victor cleared his throat, said he wished we had spoken before. I reminded him we did, many times. Before doorsteps turned cold, before silence became their language, Stephanie began to talk, but her voice faltered. She reached for a wine glass, more for distraction than thirst. I told them I wasn't here for a fight or a reckoning. I was here to end the confusion. They asked what I wanted. I said, nothing more. That was the entire point. I wanted nothing more from either of them. Victor sat down slowly, as if something heavy inside him had finally cracked. He asked what I would do next. I said I was heading to Oregon in a few days. Petra had introduced me to a community organization up there, older women supporting younger women who had aged out of foster care. They needed board guidance, and someone who knew how to stretch a dollar without stretching the truth. Stephanie stared at me. She knew what I was doing. I was building again, but not with them. As I turned to leave, I heard Victor call my name. Not Mum, just my name, and I didn't turn back. Outside, the sky was still, pale blue and utterly indifferent, the kind of afternoon where the world moved quietly without needing permission. I walked down the steps with nothing in my hands, but everything in order. That night, I returned to the same diner, sat in the same booth by the window. The waitress asked if I wanted the usual. I nodded, and as she walked away, I looked around and saw something simple. A room full of strangers, eating ordinary meals, living honest lives. And I felt more at home than I had in years. The following morning, my phone lit up at 6:03 a.m. One missed call, then two, then 9. By the time I finished pouring my coffee, there were 17. By noon, 47. Victor, Stephanie, unknown numbers. One voicemail from Victor's assistant asking if I could make time to speak. I didn't call back. Instead, I packed a suitcase, folded 3 sweaters, 2 books, a half-written letter to a girl named Sadie I'd met through Petra's group. She had just aged out of the foster care system and was applying for a job at a bakery. I told her how I once hired a girl who couldn't stop crying during the interview, and how that same girl ran the entire front desk of my laundromat 6 months later. By evening, I sat by the bus terminal near North Lamar, waiting for my ride to the airport. I wore my coat buttoned to the top, hands tucked in the deep pockets. It was colder than it should have been for Texas in March. The same black car from the club pulled up again. I thought about ignoring it, but this time the window rolled down. Victor. He stepped out, no jacket, no tie. Just him, eyes red at the edges. He said he had read the foundation transfer twice, said he wanted to understand. I told him there was nothing left to explain. He stood there, not moving. Like a man realizing too late he'd missed the train and now had to walk home in the dark. He said it felt like I had erased him. I looked at him and said that I had erased the illusion, not the man. That was when he started to cry, not loud, just quietly, like someone who knew no apology could reverse the clock. I didn't comfort him, not because I was angry, but because he wasn't a child anymore. He asked if we could start over. I didn't respond. I turned toward the bus station entrance, nodded at the driver, and boarded. I sat in the last row, next to a woman with a backpack full of yarn and a half-eaten bagel. She smiled at me. I smiled back. Outside the window, Victor was still standing there. He didn't wave. The engine started. The bus pulled out. And I didn't look back. By the time we reached the airport, I felt oddly calm, like my body had caught up to a decision my heart had made weeks ago. The terminal was nearly empty. I passed through security with ease. I boarded my flight with a seat by the window. As the plane took off, I pressed my forehead to the glass and watched Austin shrink into squares and shadows. I wasn't sure what Oregon would hold. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But I did know this. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight, and that felt like freedom. The descent into Portland was smooth. I watched the green roll in beneath the clouds, dotted with rooftops and winding rivers. I hadn't flown in almost a decade, and I had forgotten how it felt to be weightless, even for a short while. At baggage claim, the woman from the bus sat across from me again. We didn't speak this time, just nodded, quietly acknowledging something shared but unspoken. I rolled my suitcase outside and stood under the grey sky. It smelled like pine and wet pavement. I inhaled slowly. I wasn't waiting for anyone. No one was holding a sign with my name. No hugs. No forced smiles. Just me. I took a cab into town, asked the driver to take the long way. He told me about his daughter, who worked as a mechanic, and how proud he was of her. I listened. His voice filled the silence in a way that didn't feel heavy. The apartment I had rented for the month was small. One bedroom, creaky floors, kitchen that looked like it hadn't seen much cooking in years. But it was clean, and it was mine. I set my bag down and sat at the kitchen table. I didn't unpack. I just listened. There was a drip from the bathroom sink, a soft hum from the refrigerator. No voices, no footsteps above or below. That night, I made myself a simple meal: eggs and toast, a slice of apple. I ate slowly. I couldn't remember the last time a meal had been that quiet. Before bed, I wrote in the journal Petra had gifted me the week before. She'd slipped it into my purse without a word. On the first page, she'd written, in her elegant cursive, "You are allowed to start over." So I wrote. I wrote about the bus station, about Victor's face through the window, about how silence can say more than 1,000 words. I wrote about the suitcase I packed and the one I didn't. I wrote that I had loved my son with everything I had, and I had waited, too long perhaps, for him to love me back with even a fraction of it. But people are not banks. We cannot wait forever for someone to make a deposit. By the second night, I found a corner bookstore 3 blocks away. It was run by 2 women in their 60s who offered tea in chipped mugs and had a cat named Howard as roaming the aisles. I spent hours there, not reading, just sitting, letting myself belong somewhere without needing to prove I deserved to. One of the women, Estelle, asked if I was visiting. I said I wasn't sure yet. She nodded like she understood that more than I did. Later that evening, I watched the street below from the apartment window. I saw a young mother chase her toddler down the sidewalk, both of them laughing. A teenager walked past with headphones and a milkshake. I didn't envy them. I didn't long for their youth or their laughter. I just felt present, for the first time in a very long time. And that, in itself, was a kind of healing I hadn't expected. A week passed, then 2. My phone stayed silent most days, aside from the occasional message from Petra. She didn't ask where I was. She just sent photos of silly things, like a dog wearing sunglasses at the market, or a coffee cup with my name spelled wrong. And I loved her for that. The calls from Victor and Celeste had stopped after the 4th day. At first, they had come in bursts, 47 missed calls, all within hours. But when no one picks up, even the loudest voices grow tired. I didn't answer. I didn't block them either. I just let the silence speak. I found myself settling into this borrowed space, not as someone hiding, but as someone choosing stillness. Each morning, I made tea and walked the same 3 blocks to the bookstore. Estelle saved me a seat by the window. I began shelving books, one by one, just to help. No one asked me to. On the 23rd day, I received an envelope. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Victor's. Inside was a single sheet. No apology, no explanation, just a line written in shaky ink. I didn't know how to be your son. I folded the note and placed it between the pages of the journal Petra had given me. Not out of bitterness, but because some words are meant to be held, not answered. I spent the afternoon planting herbs in the apartment window. Rosemary, basil, mint, simple things. But they made the space feel alive. And for the first time in years, I did not feel like a burden. I didn't return to California. I didn't send a letter. I didn't make a scene. I simply chose peace. Not as a punishment, but as a promise to myself. A promise that I no longer needed to prove I belonged in someone else's version of home. I had built my own, and it was enough. Have you ever walked away from the very people you once thought you'd never live without? Have you chosen silence, not out of defeat, but as a way to reclaim your dignity? If this story touched a part of your heart, share your thoughts below. Maybe you've been the mother, maybe the child, or maybe the silence itself. This space is for you.